Hello friends, and welcome back to Farmyard Care. Have you ever lifted another costly bag of feed, walked it across your yard, and quietly asked yourself whether this routine still makes sense? Maybe you are the kind of person raising birds in a small backyard, tending a garden after work, stretching every dollar, and hoping your land can give a little more back. Month after month, you keep buying grain, only to watch egg production slow down in winter or during molt. And it can feel like the harder you work, the less efficient the system becomes. If that sounds familiar, I want you to know something important. You are not failing, and you are certainly not alone. Many backyard growers, homesteaders, and garden-minded families reach this point. The truth is, most people were never shown that there is a more practical way to raise poultry, one that works with the rhythms of the land instead of constantly fighting against them. Today, we are going to take a fresh look at backyard birds. What if there are birds that can give you as many eggs as common laying hens, sometimes even more, while doing a much better job of feeding themselves through natural foraging? That means lower feed bills, healthier ground, fewer pests, and a flock that fits more naturally into the life you are trying to build. In this video, I am going to walk you through 4 remarkable birds that can outperform ordinary chickens in ways many people overlook. And then I will show you the bigger principle that can change your feed costs for good. So before we get into it, make sure you subscribe to Farmyard Care, and let's get into the birds that can let your land start carrying more of the load. Section 1. The Trap of the Modern Chicken. Before we meet the 4 birds that can do far more of the feeding work for themselves, we need to stop and ask a simple but important question. Why does the modern chicken depend so heavily on expensive feed in the first place? Once you understand that, everything else in this conversation starts to make sense. The answer is rooted in both history and biology. The chickens most people keep today trace back to a wild ancestor known as the red jungle fowl, a bird native to Southeast Asia. Out in the wild, these birds developed in environments tied closely to bamboo forests. And bamboo has a very unusual pattern. It can go years without much happening, then suddenly drop an enormous amount of seed all at once, turning the forest floor into a short-lived abundance of food. The red jungle fowl adapted to take advantage of those rare moments. When food was plentiful, they shifted into intense reproductive mode and laid heavily for a short period. But outside of those rare conditions, they were never meant to produce eggs non-stop. In a natural setting, they might lay only 10 to 15 eggs in an entire year. Over many generations, people selectively bred chickens to stay in that high production state almost all the time. That is how we ended up with hens capable of laying close to 300 eggs a year. It is impressive, no question, but it also creates a system that demands constant input. To keep producing at that level, a laying hen needs a steady supply of high-protein grain, usually in the range of 16 to 20% protein, along with long daylight hours that can stretch up to 16 hours a day. Once those inputs drop, production drops with them. So in many backyards, the problem is not that the keeper is doing something wrong. The problem is that the bird itself has been shaped for an artificial system that depends on regular, purchased feed. And that brings us to a much smarter question. What happens when we stop trying to push one kind of bird beyond what the land naturally offers, and instead choose birds that are better built to forage, adapt, and still give us excellent production? That is where this really starts to get exciting, because the first bird on our list is one of the finest examples of that balance you will find anywhere. Section 2. Bird 1. The Khaki Campbell duck, the egg-laying machine. The first bird I want you to seriously consider is the Khaki Campbell duck. If your goal is to keep a steady supply of eggs coming to the kitchen while cutting down the amount of feed you have to buy, this bird deserves your attention. It is one of those rare breeds that combines serious production with strong natural foraging ability, and that makes it incredibly valuable on a practical homestead. The Khaki Campbell was developed in England in the late 1800s by Adele Campbell, and it was bred with egg-laying performance very much in mind. Under solid conditions, a healthy female can produce somewhere between 280 and 340 eggs in a year. That is an exceptional output by almost any standard, and one reason so many experienced keepers still respect this breed. But the real advantage goes beyond the egg basket. Khaki Campbells are active, determined foragers. While chickens tend to scratch and peck mostly at the surface, these ducks work differently. They use their bills to search deeper through damp soil, low vegetation, and soft ground, constantly hunting for slugs, snails, worms, and other small invertebrates. In a garden setting, that matters more than many people realize. If you have ever walked out in the morning and found leafy greens chewed down by slugs, then you already understand the value here. A Khaki Campbell can help you in two ways at the same time. It can give you a dependable flow of eggs, and it can reduce pest pressure naturally without asking you to reach for chemicals. That is the kind of bird that earns its place in a productive yard. And despite what some people assume, you do not need a pond or a large body of water to keep them successfully. A simple shelter and clean water deep enough for them to dip and rinse their bills is enough to get started. In fact, one of the easiest ways to help them forage even better is to maintain a shallow, muddy area near their water source. Ducks are naturally drawn to that kind of ground, and they will spend a surprising amount of time working through it for insects and tiny living things. The more opportunities they have to do that, the less pressure there is on your feed bill, and the more your birds begin to work with the land instead of depending entirely on what comes in a bag. Topic Bird 3. Bird 2. The Indian runner duck, the agile pest hunter. Now, if you love the idea of strong egg production, but you are also dealing with constant insect pressure around the yard, especially ticks, then the next bird on this list may be exactly what you need. Bird number 2 is the Indian runner duck, and once you see how it moves and works the ground, you understand very quickly why so many keepers value it. Indian runners have one of the most unusual body shapes in the poultry world. They stand tall and upright, almost like little bottles moving across the grass. It looks funny at first, but that posture is more than just a charming feature. It helps make them quick, alert, and surprisingly efficient as foragers. Where a chicken might stay in one area scratching for a while, runner ducks move constantly, covering a much wider stretch of ground and hunting as they go. That matters a great deal if you are trying to lower pest numbers naturally. These birds are excellent at picking through a property for beetles, fly larvae, and especially ticks. For families in places where ticks are a real concern, that gives the Indian runner value far beyond the eggs it lays. It becomes part of the way you protect the spaces where your family walks, gardens, and works. And the egg production is nothing to overlook. A good Indian runner can lay around 250 to 300 eggs a year, which puts it firmly in the category of serious producers. On top of that, duck eggs tend to be a little larger than chicken eggs, with richer yolks and a fuller nutrient profile, including more fat, protein, and omega-3s. If you bake or simply enjoy a richer breakfast egg, that difference is easy to appreciate. Another thing I always like to point out is that Indian runners do best as a group. They are social birds by nature, and when you start with at least 3 instead of keeping one alone, they settle faster and forage with more confidence. You are not just adding birds to the yard, you are creating a small working team that covers ground efficiently, contributes to pest control, and keeps giving back to both your garden and your table. And with that in mind, let's move from a bird known for speed and activity to one admired for something entirely different: quiet strength and long-term self-reliance. Section 4. Bird 3. The Muscovy duck, the silent, self-sustaining provider. If you are thinking beyond daily egg counts and looking at the bigger picture of long-term sustainability, then bird number 3 deserves your full attention. The Muscovy duck is one of the most practical birds a homestead can have, especially if your goal is to build a flock that can maintain itself with less ongoing input from you. Muscovies are unique in more ways than one. They come originally from South America, and unlike many domestic ducks, they are not descended from the mallard line. That difference shows up in their behavior, their hardiness, and the way they fit into a low-input system. They have a strong natural ability to adapt, forage, and manage with very little fuss. And for those of you living in quieter neighborhoods, there is another major advantage here. Muscovies are far more peaceful in sound. They do not give you the loud quacking most people associate with ducks. Instead, they communicate with soft hisses and low sounds that are far easier to live with. Now, in pure egg numbers, they do not compete with the highest producing layers on this list. A Muscovy hen will usually produce somewhere around 60 to 120 eggs a year, depending on conditions and season. But focusing only on that number would miss what makes this bird so valuable. Muscovies are excellent dual-purpose birds, known for producing rich, lean meat that many experienced keepers consider some of the best in domestic poultry. At the same time, they are active hunters, constantly reducing flies, mosquitoes, and even small pests around the property. But the real reason Muscovies stand apart is their ability to reproduce and raise young with very little help. A good Muscovy hen is a patient, dependable mother. She will sit steadily, hatch her clutch, and guide those ducklings through the early stages of life with an instinct that saves you time, money, and effort. That means fewer chicks to buy, less dependence on incubators, and far less management overall. Over time, you are not just keeping a flock going. You are allowing the flock to renew itself in a way that feels much closer to a natural cycle. And once you see how powerful that is, you start to realize that self-sufficiency is not only about what a bird lays or eats, but also about how much of the future it can carry on its own. Section 5. Bird 4. The guinea fowl, the ultimate tick exterminator. Now we come to a bird that pushes self-sufficiency even further. Bird number 4 is the guinea fowl. And if your goal is to keep feed costs low while letting your land do more of the work, this bird is in a category of its own. Guinea fowl come from the tough, demanding landscapes of West Africa, and they have held on to far more of their natural instincts than most domestic poultry. That matters because during the warmer months of spring and summer, they can meet nearly all of their nutritional needs by ranging and foraging across the property. In practical terms, that means purchased grain stops being the foundation of their diet and becomes more of an occasional support. Farmers have long respected guineas for one skill above all others: tick control. These birds are relentless patrol workers. They move through grass and open ground with purpose, picking off ticks, grasshoppers, and Japanese beetles while causing far less disturbance to garden beds than a scratching chicken usually would. And while they are best known for pest control, they also contribute to the kitchen, laying around 80 to 160 nutrient-rich eggs in season. But there is another reason so many homesteaders swear by them. Guinea fowl are naturally alert, almost unbelievably so. The moment something unfamiliar enters the property, whether it is a hawk overhead or a fox moving nearby, they sound off with a loud, unmistakable alarm. In that sense, they do more than feed themselves. They help watch over the land, warn the rest of the flock, and add another layer of protection to the system you are building. And once you see a bird doing all of that, it becomes clear that the real advantage is not just in what it produces, but in how many jobs it can do at once. Section 6. The real secret: rotational ranging. Now, after looking at all 4 of these remarkable birds, I want to share the most important truth in this entire discussion. The biggest change you can make is not simply choosing a better bird. It is learning how to set up your land so that it actively helps feed your flock. A lot of people think of birds and feed as 2 separate things. They imagine the birds in one place and the purchased ration in a bag somewhere else. But in a healthy, regenerative setup, the land and the flock are part of the same working system. The birds feed from the land, and in return, they fertilize and stimulate it. One of the best ways to make that happen is through a simple method called rotational ranging. And the beauty of this idea is that you do not need a large farm to use it well. If you divide your outdoor space into 2 or 3 sections with portable fencing, You can rotate your birds from one area to the next every few weeks. As one section rests, the grass has time to recover, insect life builds back up, and the soil begins to regain balance. Then when the birds return, they are not stepping onto worn-out ground. They are moving into a fresh feeding zone full of renewed life. This is where the system starts to change financially. Many farmers and homesteaders using this approach report reducing purchased grain by 50 to 80% during the warm season. But the savings are only part of the story. The manure feeds the soil, the ground improves over time, and the whole property becomes more productive year after year. At that point, you are not just keeping poultry anymore, you are managing a living system that grows stronger the longer you work with it. At the end of the day, building a sustainable homestead is not about pushing harder, lifting more feed bags, or trying to force nature into a system that never really made sense for your land. It is about making better choices, one step at a time, and choosing birds and methods that naturally fit the life you are trying to build. When you move away from the high-input model of the modern laying hen and start looking at birds like the Khaki Campbell, the Indian runner, the Muscovy, and the Guinea Fowl, something important begins to happen. You reduce your dependence on expensive feed, you make better use of your land, and you bring your food system closer to something stable, practical, and resilient. Instead of carrying the full burden yourself, you allow nature to take back some of the work. So now, I would love to hear from you. Which of these 4 birds feels like the best match for your yard, your garden, and your family's needs? Are you drawn to the strong egg numbers of the Indian runner, the quiet reliability of the Muscovy, or the hard-working independence of the Guinea Fowl? Share your thoughts down in the comments, because I always enjoy hearing how different people are building systems that fit their land. And if this video gave you useful ideas for your own journey, take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to Farmyard Care. It helps this channel reach more growers, gardeners, and homesteading families who want practical ways to live more sustainably. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Start where you are, use what you have, and let nature do more of the heavy lifting. I will see you in the next video.